Welcome, dreamers, to another journey through time's hidden corridors. I am your guide through the dreaming historian, where ancient mysteries whisper their secrets to those who dare to listen. Tonight, we venture into the ancient library that held all human knowledge, a tale shrouded in the mists of time, where reality and legend intertwine like threads in an ancient tapestry. The Library of Alexandria, so often spoken of, yet never truly understood, was not merely a storehouse of scrolls, but a sanctuary of wisdom, a beacon of enlightenment flickering on the edge of the known world. Before we embark on this mystical journey, if these whispers from the past resonate with your soul, let your presence be known through a gentle like, and join our circle of dreamers by subscribing for more nightly journeys into history's hidden realms. Share with us, fellow dreamers, from which corner of the world you are joining tonight's contemplation. Let our global community of mystery seekers connect across time zones as we drift together into the past. Now, settle into comfort, close your eyes, and let the ancient voices guide you into peaceful contemplation. There was a time when the edge of the known world was not a boundary, but a gateway, when the sea's horizon did not end with fear, but with promise. And upon the shimmering coast where the Nile kisses the Mediterranean, a city rose radiant and dreaming called Alexandria. Its streets echoed with the rhythm of sandals and the murmur of tongues from every corner of the ancient world. Greek, Egyptian, Hebrew, Persian, Phoenician languages woven together like a tapestry of breath. At the heart of this city, not far from the great lighthouse that pierced the mist with its eternal flame, stood a temple to knowledge more sacred than any shrine to the gods. Alexandria was not merely a city, it was a symbol, a vision, a hope, commissioned by Alexander the Great and drawn into reality by his successor Ptolemy I. The city was a marvel of design, a meeting place of minds, and a crucible of cultures. Where other cities boasted their temples to the divine, Alexandria built temples to wisdom, and none more sacred, none more whispered about across the ages, than the library. The Library of Alexandria, its name alone evokes the scent of old papyrus and salt-washed stone, the rustle of parchment in lamplight, and the weight of silence pregnant with thought. It is said that at its height, the library held hundreds of thousands of scrolls. But more than that, it held dreams, questions, visions, and our worlds folded in ink and breath, suspended in time. Scholars from Babylon, poets from Athens, priests from Memphis, astronomers from Rhodes, they came here, drawn not by conquest, but by curiosity, by the yearning to know. And in Alexandria, knowledge was not guarded, it was invited. The Ptolemies, those Greek rulers of an Egyptian land, believed wisdom was power, and power was divine. They sought not only to rule the world but to understand it, and in doing so they built something unprecedented, a sanctuary where no idea was too dangerous to be examined, where scrolls were treated with the reverence of relics, and the act of reading was a ritual. We imagine the halls of the library lit by oil lamps, casting golden halos on the marble columns. We imagine the scent of beeswax and ink, the gentle rustle of scrolls being unrolled, and the soft footsteps of robed seekers wandering between shelves. We imagine the questions asked in those spaces, questions of stars, of souls, of numbers, of gods, and the answers that trembled in return. But what did this place truly look like? The truth is veiled in mystery. No drawing survives, no detailed plan. The Library of Alexandria is an echo, not a monument. And perhaps that is what makes it so powerful. Like a dream half remembered, its outlines blur at the edges of our imagination, yet we feel its presence haunting, yearning. Scholars believe the library was connected to the Temple of the Muses, the Mausiana place where muses, the daughters of memory, were venerated. It was not just a collection of texts, but a living institution, a place of lectures, discussions, and debate, a sanctuary for those devoted to the mysteries of the universe. The Mausian itself was no ordinary temple. It was a philosophical garden, a campus of minds. It may have included dining halls for scholars, observatories for star watchers, botanical gardens for those who listened to the language of plants, and dissection rooms where the mysteries of the human body were quietly explored. Imagine walking there, dreamer, the columns tall and cool to the touch, the air scented with the sea, warmed by the sun, the murmur of debate echoing under stone arches as the great thinkers of the day shared discoveries and questions. Imagine unrolling a scroll and seeing the handwriting of a man who lived centuries before, whose thoughts still shimmer in ink like dew on ancient grass. And yet, for all its reverence and light, the Library of Alexandria was also a place of shadows. Knowledge, after all, is never neutral. Who decides what is kept, what is copied, what is lost? In this sacred house of wisdom, scrolls were copied, traded, collected, even seized, Every ship that entered Alexandria's harbor was searched. Scrolls aboard were taken to the library, copied by scribes, and sometimes, so it is said, the originals were kept, while the copies were returned. A bold act, perhaps even an arrogant one. But in this city of light, the hunger for knowledge knew no bounds. Among the stories whispered through time is that of Demetrius of Phalerum, a scholar from Athens who helped build the library's collection. It is said he sent letters across the ancient world, requesting copies of every known text in philosophy, medicine, astronomy, history, poetry, and prophecy. The dream was to hold the totality of human thought in one place. The dream was to grasp all that had ever been known. And what a dangerous dream that was. For knowledge, when gathered too tightly, begins to smolder. It becomes heavy, sacred. It becomes something that kingdoms fear and prophets warn of. Yet in Alexandria, they pursued it all the same. Here, Eratosthenes calculated the circumference of the earth with a shadow and a stick. Here Hipparchus charted the stars and theorized the precession of the equinoxes. Here scholars dissected human cadavers in defiance of taboos, seeking the nature of life itself. Here ancient Indian texts may have mingled with Babylonian cuneiform, Egyptian hieroglyphs, and Homeric verse. What kind of mind could walk these halls and not feel humbled? Alexandria was not merely a city of marble and scrolls. It was a city of longing, a longing to know everything, to see everything, to remember everything. But no light lasts forever. Even as it shone, there were cracks forming in the marble, tensions within the Ptolemaic dynasty, political intrigue, the slow churn of empires rising and falling, and always the question, what is too much to know? For those who possess all knowledge stand close to the gods, and mortals who come too close often find themselves burned by the divine fire they seek to touch. As night deepens over the dream of Alexandria, we will, in the next chapter, wander deeper into the sanctuary itself, into the scrolls, the guardians, the unspoken rituals that preserved and protected the wisdom of the ancient world. So let us drift onward. Let the salt air of Alexandria follow you into your dreams, and the golden light of knowledge soften the darkness. Imagine, dear dreamer, an entire universe unfurled in silence, not through stars in the sky, but through ink on parchment. In the Library of Alexandria, each scroll was a constellation, a spark from the collective imagination of humanity. Each curve of the stylus was a breath of memory, a thought passed from hand to hand, from soul to soul, through time's invisible corridors. They say the collection was vast, so vast, in fact, that no one could count the scrolls precisely. Some whispered of 40,000, others of 700,000. Whether these were separate volumes or mere copies, no one can say. But the truth of Alexandria lies not in numbers, but in wonder. These scrolls were more than texts. They were vessels. A single scroll might contain a poem first recited under a moonlit fig tree in Lesbos. Another might hold instructions for preserving honeyed wine, whispered from a Babylonian scribe to a Phoenician merchant. Others still might record the dreams of prophets, the cures of healers, or the riddles of ancient geometry. Each scroll had its own voice, its own rhythm. Some were written in Greek, others in Coptic, Sanskrit, Hebrew, Aramaic, or the sacred hieroglyphs of the Nile. Some spoke of things long lost, Atlantean cities, forgotten rituals, vanished gods. Others recorded the everyday, a merchant's account, a sailor's route, a lover's lament. And to open one, to unroll it slowly, was to call forth not just knowledge, but presence. For in that sacred unfolding, you met the breath of a vanished world. The keepers of the library knew this. They were not mere librarians, they were guardians, initiates, dreamers. Men and women who believed that knowledge, properly tended, was a sacred flame that could light the path for future generations. Chief among them, it is said, was Zenodotus of Ephesus, the first known head librarian. A poet himself, he sought order in the growing tide of knowledge. He may have been the first to attempt a systematic cataloguing of scrolls by author, title, and subject. He introduced corrections to Homeric texts, perhaps dreaming of a pure form of myth, unmarred by the erosion of time. After him came Callimachus, who composed the Pinaxa catalogue of authors, a map of minds. Imagine that, an index of the entire known world's knowledge, stretching through countless papyrus rolls, a literary cartography of human thought. But how did these guardians choose what to keep, what to copy, what to discard? Their task was not passive. They were curators of civilization's memory, filtering the stream of human experience, and in their decisions echoes still ring today. It is said that scrolls were not only collected but actively sought. Emissaries were sent to other cities and temples, offering gold for rare texts. Sometimes, entire libraries were purchased or claimed by royal edict and shipped across seas to join Alexandria's ever-growing repository. One legend tells of the Athenian state archives being borrowed and copied in their entirety only for the originals to mysteriously remain in Egypt, while the copies were returned. Another speaks of ships seized in harbor, their scrolls copied by a legion of scribes working in silence beneath oil lamps. Even the plays of Aeschylus and Sophocles may have passed through these hands, but there were dangers hidden in such abundance. A single mistake by a scribe could alter the meaning of a text forever, a word misread, a phrase miscopied, a symbol misunderstood, and thus, a lineage of knowledge could bend subtly like a river shifting course beneath silt. The library did not merely collect it transformed. Texts were translated, synthesized, annotated. Egyptian medicine was reinterpreted through Greek philosophy. Persian cosmology blended with Platonic idealism. Hindu mathematical ideas entered the conversations of Hellenistic scientists. This fusion gave birth to new thought. It was not preservation, but rebirth. Within these halls, dreamer, astronomy met mysticism, poetry met mathematics, and myth met measurement. The heavens were charted with precision and wonder. The body was examined not with fear, but with awe. The soul was debated not in temples, but in scrolls. And in this alchemy of minds, something rare was born. The infinite scroll. Not in the literal sense, but in the sense of a knowledge that had no end or pursuit, not of answers, but of deeper questions. The scrolls fed each other. A text on the Nile's floods led to speculations on lunar influence, which led to geometry, which led to music, which circled back to myth. Knowledge was circular, recursive, living, and it was here, in this sanctuary, that the great minds of the ancient world dared to dream beyond their time. Eratosthenes, with his shadow-measuring sticks, calculated the Earth's circumference with eerie accuracy. He also dreamed of universal time zones, of mapping the globe with lines of latitude and longitude. His scrolls lay next to tales of Odysseus and Orpheus, reminding us that science and story are never far apart. Archimedes may have corresponded from afar, his diagrams and treatises copied and debated by minds in the Mousia, and Hipparchus charted the stars, not to conquer the sky, but to understand its rhythm. An hero of Alexandria would later emerge from this intellectual soil with inventions so advanced they seem almost anachronistic: steam-powered doors, automatic theaters, and intricate hydraulics. What might have been hidden in those scrolls we'll never know. Were there diagrams of machines centuries ahead of their time, medical texts lost to fire and flood, prophecies we dare not read, cures whispered from vanished civilizations, the very blueprints of the ancient world's imagination? And yet, for all the marvels within, the library was always fragile. Papyrus is a delicate thing, ink fades, air consumes, and human hands, however reverent, are not eternal. Even as scrolls were copied, they perished. Even as knowledge was gathered, it was slipping away. But that was part of its mystery. The Library of Alexandria was not just a monument to knowledge, it was a recognition of loss, a sacred acknowledgement that no matter how much we learn, more will always remain beyond our grasp. That to seek wisdom is not to arrive at certainty, but to wander deeper into wonder. And so, dreamer, as we linger in the lamplit silence of this chapter, let the image of those infinite scrolls remain with you not as relics of the past, but as questions still unfolding. In our next passage, we will turn our gaze to the souls who lived and breathed among these scrolls, the philosophers, mystics, and seekers whose lives were shaped by the wisdom they touched. Let us walk softly now, for the minds of the ancients still echo in these walls. Not all sacred spaces are marked by altars. Not all keepers of wisdom wear robes of gold. In the shadowed colonnades of the Library of Alexandria, the true guardians were neither priests nor kings, but those who served memory itself, quiet scholars, wandering thinkers, and seekers of the unseen. They moved like whispers through the halls. Their sandals brushed against marble tiles warmed by the Egyptian sun. Their fingers bore the faint stains of ink, and their eyes, tired, kind, persistent, held the glow of those who have peered too long into the mystery of all things. Here, in this chamber of breath and parchment, knowledge had protectors. The head librarians were chosen not for their wealth or lineage, but for the depth of their minds. They were philosophers, scientists, poets, each bearing a different key to unlock the doors of meaning. Xenodotus, Callimachus, Eratosthenes, names preserved like faint ink on water-worn papyrus, names that echo like half-remembered dreams. But they were not alone. Many worked beside them: scribes hunched over wooden tables, copying by lamplight the delicate words of vanished lands. translators who knew the tones of many tongues, astronomers charting the dance of the planets, physicians dissecting silence and sinew to understand the mysteries of life. Among them, the Mausian was not merely a workplace, it was a calling. To serve here was to surrender to time, to abandon the vanity of fame. What mattered was the scroll, the thought, the preservation. And those who entered its circle knew that their words might never be heard by crowds, but might echo through generations. Consider the mathematician Conon of Samos, who may have mapped constellations unknown to modern eyes. Or Apollonius, who wrote of conic sections long before their relevance would be realized in later sciences. These were minds whose brilliance shimmered quietly, like starlight behind mist. And then, of course, there was Hypatia. One must speak of her carefully, reverently, as one would speak of a vanished temple or a sacred river. She came later, in the twilight years of Alexandria's golden age, born in the 4th century. A philosopher, astronomer, and mathematician who stood at the intersection of light and shadow. Daughter of Theon, herself a teacher of the Neoplatonic school, Hypatia defied the expectations of her time. In a world that often silenced the voices of women, she spoke with clarity. In a culture trembling with political and religious tension, she stood firm in her pursuit of knowledge. She taught in open forums, guiding students from across the empire, pagan and Christian alike. She drew circles in sand. She questioned the stars. She defended the mind. And it was for this, her brilliance, her visibility, her defiance, that she would later be cast down by a world unraveling into fear. But we are not yet at that sorrowful turn. Let us instead walk with her in quiet mornings, past the gentle glimmer of oil lamps and the scent of sand-swept stone. Let us hear her voice, steady and calm, as she explains the movement of the heavens or traces the elegance of Euclidean proofs. Let us glimpse, even for a moment, the grace of a mind devoted not to power, but to clarity. And let us remember that Hypatia was not the only one. There were others, countless and nameless, whose lives were given to memory. Some came from distant corners of the known world, drawn to Alexandria by the promise of learning. Others were born under its shadow, their first lullabies sung in the rhythms of philosophy. Some were archivists who never wrote a word of their own, but whose hands preserved the thoughts of millennia. They were the thread between generations, the weavers of wisdom's tapestry. The library, under their care, became not only a repository of scrolls, but of soul. They believed that to read was to listen, to copy was to remember. To translate was to offer hospitality to a stranger's thought, and to debate was not to conquer, but to refine the edge of truth. This ethos shaped the culture of the library. Here, dialogue was sacred. Disagreement was not an act of war, but of growth. Ideas were allowed to breathe, to dance, to sharpen each other like flint on flint. And in this atmosphere of contemplative courage, knowledge flourished like ivy across ancient stone. But this sacred order was fragile. Even in the library's most luminous days, shadows gathered at its edges. The guardians were mortal. The politics of the city shifted like sand. Dynasties changed. Religious tides ebbed and surged. The very curiosity that built the library also attracted suspicion. For what is more dangerous than a mind that does not yield? Yet, still they persisted. And now, centuries later, as we close our eyes and breathe in the imagined dust of their sanctuary, we feel them near. These quiet sentinels, these guardians of thought. They left no monuments, no armies, no tombs lined with gold, only ideas. And ideas, dear dreamer, are the truest form of immortality. As the candlelight fades from this chapter, we prepare to descend deeper beyond the guardians, beyond the scrolls, into the silence that surrounds them. For next, we turn to the dream of universal knowledge, the breathtaking ambition that lay at the heart of the library's existence, and the longing to know everything. Let us drift now into that dream. In the silence between the scrolls and the steps of the scholars, a deeper yearning stirred, ancient and vast. It was not content with collecting fragments. It desired the whole. This was the dream that pulsed at the center of the Library of Alexandria like a heart of light. The dream to know everything, not merely to understand one land, one god, one science, or one philosophy, but to see the full circle, to trace the lines between the stars and the veins of a leaf, to see how a Babylonian star chart echoed the rhythms of an Egyptian hymn, to know how the music of lyres might be mirrored in the motions of planets, to hold within a single sanctuary the thoughts of every people, every age, every realm of heaven and earth. It was an audacious dream, a dangerous dream, and yet, it was the guiding flame of the Mausian, the very soul of Alexandria. To grasp this ambition, dreamer, imagine yourself not as a modern visitor to a library, but as a pilgrim to a temple of infinite memory. The goal is not a single book, a single answer, but the totality of human wonder. You enter seeking the ortho panapistemonion, the complete circle of knowing. To achieve this, the founders of the library began what might be the most extraordinary campaign of collection the ancient world had ever known. Scrolls from every region were sought, borrowed, copied, purchased, or claimed. They searched beyond the Greek world into Egypt, Persia, Phoenicia, Carthage, Mesopotamia, India. They welcomed texts on astronomy and agriculture, medicine and mechanics, myth and music. Sacred verses were stored beside mathematical theorems, recipes sat beside rituals, cosmologies beside comedy, and nothing was too humble. A fisherman's knot diagram, a traveler's weather diary, a priest's dream of the afterlife, all were part of the tapestry. Because in the Alexandrian worldview, knowledge was not ranked, it was relational. Each thought, no matter how obscure, might be a missing thread in the grand design. The library did not just preserve knowledge, it synthesized it. From India came the concepts of zero and infinity, ideas whispered along trade routes and translated into Greek by scholars whose names are now forgotten. From Babylon, records of eclipses and planetary cycles found their way into Alexandrian star charts. From Egypt, wisdom about anatomy and medicine long veiled within priestly temples was now studied under rational light. The dream of the library was not only to gather, but to integrate, to take these scattered mirrors of reality and align them, until they reflected something greater than their parts, a universal pattern, a harmony. This harmony found its greatest expression in the Alexandrian passion for classification. Callimachus, as we've whispered before, devised the Pinax, the first known attempt to catalogue all human knowledge. He organized scrolls by subject, author, and origin. He traced genealogies of ideas, who influenced whom, and when, and how. He offered summaries, critiques, and annotations. Imagine holding such a scroll, dreamer, the table of human memory, inked in hand. It was not just a catalogue, it was a map of thought, and it reflected something deeper, the belief that knowledge, when arranged with care, could reveal the shape of the cosmos itself. This belief echoed across disciplines. Astronomers charted the heavens as a kind of music. Physicians believed the body mirrored the world. Philosophers debated whether memory was a kind of divine residue and echo of perfect forms. To know everything was not simply to collect it, was to connect. And so, in Alexandria, mathematics met mysticism. The geometry of Euclid became not merely a tool, but a portal into the nature of perfection. Numbers became sacred symbols. The golden ratio, the harmony of spheres, the architecture of pyramids all reflected the underlying logos, the word, the pattern behind the veil. But even as this dream unfolded, cracks appeared. For what happens when ideas conflict, when Babylonian cosmology contradicts Greek astronomy, when Indian metaphysics challenges Egyptian theology, when a scroll written in praise of one god undermines the sacred truths of another? The dream to know everything demands courage. Courage to live with paradox, to welcome the unknown, to accept that the full truth might never be held by a single scroll, a single culture, a single age. In Alexandria, this courage bloomed at least for a time. Debate was permitted. Heresy was tolerated, so long as it was spoken with grace and inquiry. The Mausean became a sanctuary for contradiction, a theater of respectful tension. And in that tension, wisdom deepened. But outside the library's walls, the world was less forgiving. The political sphere churned. The tides of empire rose and fell. Religious identities began to harden. Philosophies turned to dogmas. And the idea of universal knowledge once so luminous began to flicker. Some saw in the library's dream and arrogance. Who were these Alexandrians to claim all wisdom, to reinterpret sacred texts, to rewrite histories, to erase boundaries? The dream of total knowledge, once a flame of harmony, now cast a troubling shadow. What if such power could be used to manipulate, to conquer, to erase other voices? Even within the library, choices had to be made. What to preserve, what to translate, what to let vanish quietly. The dream, like all dreams, could not escape the hands of those who shaped it. And yet despite all this it endures. Even now, long after the scrolls have turned to dust, the dream lives on. It lives in every scholar who studies many traditions, in every poet who fuses old myths with new meanings, in every seeker who dares to believe that all knowledge, science, spirit, story flows from a single source. So close your eyes, dear dreamer. Imagine a scroll unrolling not from left to right, but outward in a spiral, infinite, golden at its center. A question, at its edge, the stars, and between them, The library. Always the library. In our next chapter, we will walk among the sacred knowledge itself, exploring the disciplines and discoveries that once filled these hallowed halls. Astronomy, medicine, mathematics, and more. The branches of the great tree of knowing await. Let us drift toward them now. Beneath the vaulted ceilings of the Mausian, where sunlight filtered through latticework and the hush of parchment echoed in every chamber, knowledge was not only stored, it was practiced. And in these sacred halls of the Library of Alexandria, disciplines flourished like wild gardens. Constellations were mapped, veins were traced, and numbers whispered secrets long buried in stone. The ancient scholars did not divide the world as we often do today. Science and spirit, medicine and myth, art and arithmetic, these were not separate paths but winding branches of a single tree. In Alexandria, to study the stars was to understand the soul. To dissect the body was to glimpse the architecture of the heavens. To write a formula was to echo the rhythm of the gods. And so, within this chapter, we shall walk with the minds, who dared to press ink into the mysteries of existence. Let us begin with the stars. The Alexandrian sky, unpolluted by modern haze, stretched vast and glittering over the harbor. On clear nights, astronomers gathered to read it as one might read sacred text. Hipparchus, long before telescopes, charted the stars and discovered the precession of the equinoxes. He saw that the heavens themselves were not fixed, but in slow, majestic motion like the breathing of time. In Alexandria, astronomy was not merely a science, it was a theology, a philosophy. The stars were not distant rocks, but luminous symbols. Their arrangements told stories of gods and fates, and yet Alexandrian thinkers also measured them with uncanny precision. They catalogued brightness, mapped orbits, and constructed devices, armillary spheres, celestial globes to model the heavens in brass and wood. And then came Eric. With nothing more than shadows and mathematics, he calculated the circumference of the earth by placing a stick in the ground at Alexandria, and knowing that a well in Syene showed no shadow at the same time of day, he inferred the earth's curvature. His numbers were remarkably close to modern measurements. Imagine that, dreamer, a curved earth, imagined not from space, but from sunlight, geometry, and wonder. Now let us descend from stars to blood. Medicine in Alexandria was both daring and dangerous. Unlike other cities where the body was taboo, Alexandria became a place where physicians performed dissections, perhaps even vivisections, in the silence of its chambers. The secrets of flesh were revealed. Herophilos studied the brain and the nervous system. He was among the first to suggest that the brain, not the heart, was the seat of intelligence. He distinguished between motor and sensory nerves, examined the ventricles of the brain, and explored the liver, the eyes, the reproductive system. His colleague Erasistratus dissected veins and arteries, theorizing about circulation. He believed that nerves carried not blood but spiritu pneuma divine. While mistaken in parts, his curiosity opened a path that would later lead to great truths. Together they created anatomical texts, now lost, that may have contained diagrams of breathtaking clarity. In Alexandria, the body was no longer merely sacred, it was knowable, and to know it was, in a way, to honor it. Yet these acts were not without controversy. To cut open a corpse or worse, a living being was a direct challenge to ancient beliefs. It was to tread the border between healer and defiler. But the pursuit of truth required courage, and in the quiet of the library's inner rooms, the scalpel became a sacred tool. From stars and blood, we move now to numbers, those eternal symbols, cold to some, but to the Alexandrians, alive. Numbers were not only for counting, they were for understanding the hidden architecture of existence. Euclid, in his Elements, gave form to geometry that would echo through millennia. His postulates were not merely technical, they were philosophical meditations. A straight line, a circle, a right angle. With these, he built a cathedral of logic. Archimedes, though he lived in Syracuse, was part of this world. His letters reached Alexandria. His discoveries about levers, buoyancy, and mathematical infinity were discussed in the Mausian. His scrolls were read by candlelight. His formulas whispered among marble columns. To these thinkers, numbers were not invented, they were discovered. They pre-existed humanity, like the stars. Even more mystical was the belief in sacred geometry. Ratios like the golden mean were not just aesthetic, they were divine. They guided the proportions of temples, the patterns of shells, the curves of galaxies. In Alexandria, mathematicians were mystics. A triangle could be an offering, a spiral, a symbol of eternity. And then there were the texts long lost that hinted at connections we can only imagine. Astrology and astronomy merged. The movement of planets was tied to human temperaments. Medical diagnoses were timed to lunar cycles. Architecture was aligned with solstices. Music was based on mathematics. The cosmos was a grand harmony, and every scroll in the library was a note in its song. This was Alexandria's greatest gift, the unity of knowledge. Here no discipline stood alone. Each one was a thread in the tapestry. The astronomer might speak with the physician, the poet with the mathematician, the philosopher with the engineer. They were dreamers all, and within this dream, Alexandria flourished. But even as the scrolls multiplied, as discoveries dazzled the minds of the faithful, there lingered a shadow in unspoken fear, for to know so much is to walk close to the edge. One must ask, what knowledge should be pursued? What should remain hidden? Were some secrets too sacred for parchment? In the next chapter we shall explore this fragile balance, the tension between wisdom and hubris, and the invisible line between divine insight and forbidden fire. For the Library of Alexandria held not only light, but shadow. Let us walk carefully now, deeper into its sacred silence. There is a silence more profound than absence, a silence born not from forgetting, but from not daring to speak. Within the Library of Alexandria, amid the shelves and the starlight and the smell of ink and oil, there lived not only the light of knowledge, but the flickering shadows of what might never be fully known. This was the realm of forbidden fire, not fire of flame, but fire of insight, illumination so profound, so penetrating, that it might consume as easily as it might enlighten. For what happens, dreamer, when a mind dares to see too much? The scholars of Alexandria asked not just how the stars moved, but why. They questioned the structure of the soul, the order of the gods, the origins of time itself. They delved into medicine, yes, but also into alchemy. They charted geometry but wandered into mysticism. And sometimes, in the margins of the scrolls, appeared diagrams that were never meant for public eyes. This was not unusual. Across many cultures, the guardians of deeper knowledge hid it behind metaphor, symbol, and veil. In Alexandria, such wisdom was not always inscribed in open scribes. It was passed hand to hand, mouth to ear, from master to disciple. There are whispers, fragments, more than facts of a sublibrary. A secret section of the Mausian restricted to only the most initiated. A chamber where scrolls too sacred, too dangerous, or too strange were kept. A place of quiet ritual. A place where symbols outweighed language. A place veiled from history. No records of it survive, but legends speak of scrolls on the nature of divine essence. Of blueprints for machines that could move without human hands. Of diagrams mapping the soul's passage beyond death. Of star charts that predicted the end of cycles, not just the movement of seasons. Perhaps these were myths. But Alexandria was a place where myth and reason did not compete, they conversed. Even the most rational minds believed there were truths too large for logic alone. And so, alongside the mathematics of Euclid, one might find Orphic hymns, next to medical treatises, incantations. Alongside treatises on mechanics, sacred geometry born of temple lore. It was this intermingling that made Alexandria unique and vulnerable. To those who believed that truth should be revealed only through sacred authority, the library's openness was dangerous. To those who held power through dogma, the questioning spirit of the Mausian was subversive. And to those who feared the consequences of too much knowledge, who saw in scrolls the seeds of hubris and rebellion, the Library of Alexandria was a flickering torch far too close to dry timber. Some texts were simply never meant to be written. That was the whispered belief of more than one philosopher who passed through these halls. Take, for instance, the Pythagoreans. Though they predated Alexandria, their influence lingered like incense. They believed in the power of numbers, not merely to measure, but to invoke. Certain ratios were sacred. Certain harmonies could open the soul. Some numbers, it is said, were kept secret, entirely spoken only to initiates, lest they unravel minds unprepared. Alexandria inherited this cautious reverence. The alchemists who gathered here, known as the Camuist, spoke in veiled terms. Their scrolls, filled with obscure symbols and poetic riddles, hinted at transformations not only of metal, but of mind. To turn lead into gold was a metaphor. The real transmutation was of the self. But what if these metaphors, dreamer, were rooted in real, lost sciences? What if beneath the poetic language lay knowledge we no longer understand? Some believe the Library of Alexandria housed treatises from earlier civilizations, texts from Sumer, from Kemet, perhaps even from before recorded history, scrolls bearing the wisdom of antediluvian sages, the teachings of starborn mythologies, the codices of civilizations we now call legends. Of course, history scoffs at such claims. But Alexandria was not built by history alone, it was built by memory. And memory, as the ancient philosophers well knew, is not always linear. This fire of forbidden knowledge did not remain contained forever. Tensions rose. Some within Alexandria and beyond began to ask troubling questions. What if the soul was eternal, but the gods were not? What if the earth moved, and not the heavens? What if the diseases of the body were not punishments from above, but conditions to be cured? What if prophecy could be calculated? What if divinity was within? Ideas like these stirred unease, and so, slowly, subtly, the sacred veil began to fall. Scrolls were quietly removed from public shelves. Certain lectures ceased. Philosophers disappeared into private chambers. And, perhaps, some scrolls were hidden or together buried beneath mosaic floors, sealed in catacombs, entrusted to wandering initiates who fled before the fires came, because the fires did come. Not yet, but soon. And before that terrible chapter, there was a silence, a heavy, sacred silence, as if the library itself held its breath. For now, let us remain in that silence a little longer. In our next chapter, we shall explore the walls beyond the scrolls, the architecture of the Mausian, the rhythms of daily life within its sacred precincts, and the quiet rituals that honored knowledge as the holiest of offerings. Let us drift into that space where stone and silence met memory. Stone remembers. Long after voices fade and ink dries, it is the stone that holds the silence, the breath of the ages, the impressions of every footfall. And in Alexandria, within the sacred complex of the Mausian and its great library, the stones themselves bore witness to the daily rhythms of a dream that sought to preserve the totality of human thought. Close your eyes, dear dreamer. Let us walk together down those shadowed corridors of marble and sun-washed limestone, where the dust of centuries once sparkled like motes of gold in the light of morning. The Library of Alexandria was no mere archive. It was a living organism, its pulse in the footsteps of scholars, its breath in the turning of scrolls, its memory in the echo of voices lost to time. Though no definitive plan of the library survives, the architecture was whispered of in ancient texts, described in fragments, in glimpses, as if seen in a dream. The Mausian, from which our modern word museum is derived, was not just a repository of objects or documents. It was a sanctuary for the Muses, the 9 daughters of Mnemosyne, goddess of memory. And so, it was built like a temple. The great halls of the Mausian likely opened with colonnades of white stone, wrapped in creeping vines and shaded by the rustle of olive leaves. The air was perfumed with pressed herbs, rosemary, bay laurel, lavender gathered from medicinal gardens tended by apprentice physicians and herbal scholars. There were lecture rooms where scholars stood not to perform, but to converse. Tiered amphitheaters cradled debates that drifted from mathematics to myth, from the humors of the body to the humors of the soul. The walls bore murals of the stars, painted with pigments from across the known world: lapis from Afghanistan, ochre from Nubia, cinnabar from Iberia. And then, there were the scroll chambers. Walk with me now, softly. You step into one tall and narrow, with cedar shelves stretching toward a ceiling veiled in shadow. Each scroll rests within its niche, wrapped in linen or papyrus, tagged with a clay or ivory labeled a citybose, bearing the name of the author and the subject, written in curling hand. The smell here is unmistakable, earthy, dry, sweet, papyrus mingled with beeswax, the oil of scribes' fingers soaked into every page, the breath of centuries. You reach for a scroll, its texture smooth, but fragile. Perhaps it is a treatise on the motion of the moon, or a sacred hymn from an Eastern temple, or the lost play of a Greek tragedian, its chorus never again to be sung aloud. But in this moment, it lives again. Every scroll unrolled was an act of resurrection, a ritual, and those who performed it did so with reverence. The scribes were the quiet artisans of memory. They worked in alcoves and light wells, copying, translating, annotating, their styluses scratched delicately, their eyes straining in the lamp glow. Every letter mattered. Every margin was a decision. Then there were the translators, who held in their minds 2 or 3 tongues at once, moving thoughts across languages like sailors ferrying cargo across oceans. They did not merely copy, they interpreted. In their work, texts breathed anew. An Egyptian charm took on Greek rhythm. A Babylonian omen found shape in Latin syntax. A Sanskrit sutra met Platonic philosophy. Beyond these, the catalogers labored in abstraction, creating systems to hold the vastness. They sorted by subject, by chronology, by geography. They connected scrolls like stars into constellations of knowledge. And always the philosophers wandered. They did not isolate themselves in towers. They walked the gardens. They leaned against stone pillars, debating in hushed tones. They wrote under fig trees, observing the motion of ants and drawing analogies to society and soul. They listened to the wind, to each other, to the echo of ancient voices. Meals were shared communally, in simple rooms lined with frescoes of mythic scenes. Hermes with his caduceus, Isis holding a scroll, Thoth writing upon a tablet, bread, olives, dates, fish from the harbor. Conversation flowed as easily as wine. And yet, there was structure. The day began with the reading of new arrivals' scrolls brought in by ship, purchased from traders, copied from distant temples. These were unwrapped like offerings, debated, translated, recorded. A scroll from India might spark a discussion in the afternoon lecture. A fragment from Carthage might be added to a commentary on law. Then came lectures, often informal. A young student reciting Pythagoras might be gently corrected by an elder who had once studied under his last living disciple. The tone was never harsh correction, was kindness. Thought was a garden to be tended, not a battle to be won. The evenings often ended in quiet. As the sun slipped below the lighthouse at Pharos and the sea turned to silver, lamps were lit in the halls. The golden glow danced upon scrolls and stone. Some scholars remained, transcribing late into the night. Others sat in silence, gazing at the stars, their minds drifting outward. This was the breath of memory. No ceremony, no grand ritual, just the persistent devotion of those who believed that knowledge was a sacred trust. And it was, dear dreamer. To live in the Library of Alexandria was to live in communion with the past, with the cosmos, with the soul. It was to surrender ego and embrace continuity. One scholar built upon another, not for fame, but for the collective. It was humility wrapped in marble. And yet, for all its wonder, the halls were not immune to the winds beyond the city. The rustle of scrolls could not silence the rustle of politics, of war, of change. Outside, generals schemed, priests whispered, empires shifted. And within the library, there were quiet glances. Scrolls moved, locked doors. A sense that something precious might not last. But for now this night let us stay in the stillness. Let us hear the turning of parchment. The whisper of a poet reciting lines to himself. The scratching of a stylus. The rustle of robes. The distant crash of waves. Let us remember, for in our next chapter, the dream begins to tremble. We shall speak of fire, of invasion, of disappearance, and the first quiet loss that would begin the unraveling of this temple of thought. Let us go softly. It began not with screams, but with silence, a silence too deep to sudden as, though the city itself inhaled and forgot how to exhale. The harbor of Alexandria still shimmered beneath a pale sky, and the lighthouse of Pharos cast its beacon over darkening waves, but something had shifted in the soul of the city. The light in the eyes of the scholars dimmed. The rhythm of footsteps across the stone grew hesitant, and then there was fire. The first fire, it did not come as deliberate destruction. It was not an act of iconoclasm or blind hatred, not yet. It came as an accident, a consequence of war, as many tragedies in history so often do. The year was 48 BC. Julius Caesar had come to Alexandria, chasing Pompey into the storm of Egypt's dynastic conflict. Cleopatra and her brother Ptolemy XIII were locked in a struggle for the throne. And Caesar, ever drawn to the center of power, intervened. What began as political maneuvering soon escalated into battle, and Alexandria, ancient city of light, became the unwilling stage for Roman ambition. The fighting moved to the harbor. In a desperate effort to cut off the Egyptian fleet, Caesar gave an order, burn the ships, and the flames obeyed. The fire spread quickly, leaping from sail to sail, from mast to dock, until smoke cloaked the waters like a funeral shroud. But the flames did not remain at the port. Whether by wind or design, they crept inland into the city, into the warehouses, and it is believed by many, into the very heart of Alexandria's dream. The scrolls, thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of papyrus rolls stored near the harbor, were caught in the blaze. These were not necessarily the core of the library, but they were likely part of its satellite collections, perhaps the great warehouse annex near the docks, where newly acquired texts awaited cataloging, and in moments, centuries of memory curled to ash. There is debate among historians, of course. Some argue that the main library atop the Mausoleum survived this fire, that the heart of the scrolls remained untouched, nestled safely behind stone walls. Others say that even if the central repository endured, the loss of the annex was catastrophic, a limb severed from the body of knowledge, never to regrow. But facts, in this moment, are lesser than feeling. What mattered was the breach. For the first time, the dream of Alexandria was wounded. The city, once untouchable in its pursuit of wisdom, had been touched by war. The scrolls, so lovingly gathered from across the world, were now smoke drifting over the Mediterranean, ink that had carried the voices of sages dissolved into cinders, a Babylonian astronomer's diagrams, a Phoenician sailor's map, a healer's song, a philosopher's question, all gone, not with ceremony, not with mourning, just gone. And still, the library did not close its doors. After the fire, Caesar remained in Alexandria for months. He became entangled with Cleopatra, whose intelligence and charm matched the city she ruled. Through her influence, perhaps, some rebuilding began, some scrolls were recopied, some shelves refilled. The pulse of the library, though faint, endured, but something had changed. The invincibility of Alexandria's dream had been shattered. The scholars continued to work, yes, lectures resumed, debates reignited, scrolls were copied in the fading light. But beneath it all, there was a new awareness that knowledge could burn, that memory could die. Some say this awareness brought urgency, a rush to preserve, to transmit, to send copies outward to other cities, Pergamon, Antioch, Rhodes. Others say it brought secrecy, that certain texts were hidden, dispersed, even buried, that the guardians of memory began to whisper among themselves about how to protect what remained. There is another story, told in fragments, that a Roman soldier, overwhelmed by the blaze, stumbled into a scroll chamber lit with firelight, and saw on the wall a carving, a spiral enclosing a single eye. Beneath it, a word written in Greek, Nemean, a shrine of memory. He wept, they say, not from smoke, but from loss. Whether he existed or not, his tears are ours. For in that fire, the world lost not only knowledge but possibility. Lost were not only answers but questions never to be asked, paths never to be followed, visions never to be dreamed. And yet, the library endured, wounded, but breathing. The Mausian's marble still held warmth. The philosophers still debated. The stars still turned. In our next chapter, we will walk through the recovery, the fragile reweaving of thought, the resilience of those who refused to let memory die. We will meet the next guardians, those who held the flame even as the winds grew stronger. The dream was bruised, but not yet broken. Let us drift onward. There is a breath that follows fire, not of smoke, nor sorrow, but of resolve. It is the hush of hands returning to work, of voices beginning once more to murmur, of ash swept gently from stone floors. And in Alexandria, after the first fire had dimmed the light of her memory, the dream stirred again. The embers had not gone cold. In the wake of Julius Caesar's accidental blaze, Alexandria's scholars rose like tendrils of mist after rain wounded, but present. They understood now what once they had only intuited, that knowledge is fragile, that memory must be tended like a sacred flame, and that time always waits with open hands to erase. But they did not yield to despair. Instead, the keepers of the Mausian turned inward and onward. New scrolls were copied. Those texts spared by the fire were treasured more dearly than ever. Scholars from across the Mediterranean continued to arrive, drawn not only by Alexandria's renown, but by its resilience. They came from Asia Minor, from Gaul, from Judea and India. They brought texts, yes, but also questions, ideas, insights, and so the dialogue resumed. Cleopatra herself, a scholar and speaker of many tongues, became a quiet protector of the intellectual tradition. Though her reign was marked by the turmoil of empire and alliance, she understood the sacred duty of preservation. Within her court, philosophy was honored, languages studied, histories debated. Perhaps she walked the halls of the library herself. Perhaps she ran her fingers along the shelves and whispered names of poets long dead. There are no records of her within the Mausian, but there is presence, a sense that her intellect mingled with the air of that space. Following Cleopatra's fall and the firm Roman conquest, Alexandria entered a new phase. No longer the jewel of an independent dynasty, it was now a province, its destiny tied to faraway Rome, and yet the dream persisted. Under Roman rule, the Mausian adapted, the patronage shifted, but the scholars remained. The structure of funding changed, but the search for truth continued. Roman intellectuals came to study in Alexandria. Some brought new sciences, others brought old questions, but all, in some form, contributed to the breath of the place. It was in this era, perhaps in the 1st century CE, that Claudius Ptolemaeus, known to us simply as Ptolemy, walked these halls. Astronomer, geographer, mathematician, mystic, his Almagest would shape stargazing for more than 1,000 years. His Geographia gave shape to the known world, even as it blurred at the edges. His writings were not perfect, but they were foundational. He represented a new kind of synthesis emerging of Greek thought, Babylonian observation, Egyptian tradition, and Roman structure. And he was not alone. Physicians still studied the body. Engineers sketched aqueducts and automata. Mathematicians played with curves and shapes, seeking the harmony beneath apparent chaos. And within the library, translators worked tirelessly, rendering Indian treatises into Greek, Hebrew legends into Latin, Egyptian glyphs into something the Western mind might grasp. The dream had become more cautious, less expansive, but it was still alive. The scrolls, however, were aging. Even in their best conditions, papyrus deteriorates. The humidity, the hands, the turning of time, they wore down the words. Scribes labored not only to collect, but to maintain. Some scrolls had already crumbled. Others were patched, rewritten, reimagined. And so, a second library emerged, a daughter to the original. The Serapeum, a temple to the syncretic god Serapis, became home to another collection, perhaps housing overflow from the Mausian. It stood tall in the Rakotis district, its steps worn by seekers. There, in the shadow of sacred columns, the spirit of the library spread its roots deeper into the city. Together, the Mausian and the Serapeum formed a dual flame, one flickering in the realm of scholars, the other burning in the public square. One held rare treatises, the other held translations. One debated the soul's structure, the other taught geometry to young minds. This duplication was more than redundancy, it was preservation. And yet, Alexandria's light now flickered within a storm. The empire was changing, Christianity was rising, old temples were closing, new faiths, once persecuted, now held power. And with this shift came a new tension, a question that Alexandria could not ignore. What place has a library in a world of singular truth? The scrolls of the Mausian were many, some sacred, some heretical, some contradictory. All were voices. But in the new order of things, one voice was beginning to dominate. The plurality that once defined Alexandria became a source of suspicion. Still, the scholars worked. Some converted, others fled. Many continued in silence, hiding their scrolls, their diagrams, their prayers. They believed, perhaps, that truth must wait, that wisdom would survive in whispers, and re-emerge when the time was right. And in this age, we find the last and brightest light of Alexandria's philosophical tradition, Hypatia. Born in the late 4th century, Hypatia was the final guardian of the ancient flame. A philosopher, astronomer, and teacher, she gathered students from across the world. Her lectures on Plato, Aristotle, and mathematics drew pagans and Christians alike. Her mind was as luminous as the stars she charted, and her presence, eloquent, serena, incorruptively, became a symbol of all Alexandria once stood for. And yet, it is she who will mark the final chapter. Not yet, but soon. For now, let us remember that even after fire, after war, after conquest, Alexandria dared to dream again. Her halls were quieter, yes, her collections diminished, but her soul had not vanished. In our next chapter, we will walk beside Hypatia. We will listen to her thoughts as they echo through cloistered streets and candlelit chambers. We will witness the final shimmer of the library's heart, before it is extinguished not by time, but by fear. Let us step gently. The end is near. But the dream, perhaps, is not. She moved like still water through the sunlit streets, her robes simple, her voice soft, yet her presence unmistakable in an age trembling on the edge of transformation. When old gods faded and new empires stirred with growing zeal, Hypatia was both a relic and a revelation. Born around 355 CE in the storied city of Alexandria, she was the daughter of Theon, a mathematician and philosopher affiliated with the Mausian. From him, she inherited more than knowledge. She inherited a devotion to reason, to memory, to the sacred flame of inquiry, that had once made Alexandria the beating heart of the ancient world. But by Hypatia's time, that world was fading. The library as it had once existed, vast, open, teeming with scrolls and scholars from every tradition, was no more. The main Mausian had long since fallen into disrepair, diminished by centuries of neglect and the aftermath of political storms. Yet within the Serapeum, within private salons and hidden courtyards, its spirit flickered still, and Hypatia became its keeper. She taught in the Neoplatonist tradition, a school of thought that saw the cosmos not merely as physical, but as divine structure. To the Neoplatonists, all things emanated from the One, the ineffable source, the silent center of all existence. Reason was the bridge between human and divine, and philosophy a sacred act of return. In this, Hypatia did not preach. She invited. Her students, Christians, pagans, skeptics, gathered not only for her lectures, but for her presence. They followed her through the colonnaded streets, beneath the flowering acanthus and the carved lintels of forgotten gods. They copied her diagrams in wax, They debated with her under olive trees. They trusted her not as an oracle, but as a compass. Among her pupils was Synesius of Cyrene, who would later become a Christian bishop. In letters to her, he spoke not as a servant of a church, but as a devoted seeker of truth. He called her mother, guide, mentor, and through his writings, the image of Hypatia becomes clearer. A woman of vast intellect, deep compassion, and luminous calm. She edited her father's astronomical texts. She wrote treatises on conic sections, advanced geometry, and the motions of celestial spheres. She may have invented or improved upon scientific instruments, the astrolabe, the hydroscope, perhaps even the planisphere, but these details, like much of her life, drift between light and shadow. For Alexandria no longer welcomed ambiguity. The 4th and 5th centuries were times of rising orthodoxy. The Roman Empire had embraced Christianity as its soul and sword. Temples closed, scrolls disappeared. The Serapeum itself had been desecrated decades before, its statues shattered, its library rumored to be destroyed, though no one truly knows what survived. And yet Hypatia remained, neither wholly of the old world nor embraced by the new. She lived in a liminal space. Her wisdom transcended sect, but her refusal to abandon philosophy to reduce truth to dogma made her a target. In the city's growing unrest, Cyril, the new patriarch of Alexandria, sought to unify the Christian population under his authority. His rise brought conflict with Orestes, the imperial governor and a supporter of Hypatia's teachings. Though Hypatia never took sides, her influence became threatening. Her presence, a philosopher woman, revered by all, disrupted the narrative of power. And so, the end came. It is said that one day, in 415 CE, as she rode her chariot through the city she had long served, a mob gathered, perhaps stirred by zeal, perhaps by rumor, perhaps by fear of what she represented. They dragged her from the vehicle. Into a church they brought her, not for sanctuary, but for judgment. There they stripped her. They tore her with sharpened tiles. They burned her remains. The city fell silent. The final echo of Alexandria's ancient light had gone out. And yet, not all fire consumes. Some fire transforms. Hypatia became more than a martyr. She became memory itself, a symbol of what the ancient world had cherished, and what it had lost. She was not the last philosopher, but the final guardian of a lineage stretching back through Plato, through the Pythagoreans, through temple scribes and stargazers, to the first dreamers who ever dared to give voice to mystery. In the centuries that followed, her name was preserved in whispers by Arab scholars who honored her mind, by Renaissance thinkers who saw her as a beacon in dark ages, by modern seekers who still look to her as a bridge between science and spirit. She did not fight. She stood. She did not burn books. She read them, and in her death, the dream of Alexandria was not destroyed, it was planted. Like a seed, it lay dormant in the ashes, waiting for the right season to bloom once more. For knowledge, dear dreamer, is never truly lost. It is hidden, forgotten, shattered, but always, somewhere, it waits, and when the world is ready, it returns. In our next chapter, we will walk through that return, not in Alexandria, but in distant lands where fragments of scrolls, stories, and symbols found new homes. We will follow the journey of memory as it drifted across deserts and seas, waiting to be reawakened. The flame flickers, but it is not gone. When the winds rose and the fires consumed the marble halls, the scrolls did not all perish. Some disappeared like smoke into the night, but others wandered. Not all memory dies in fire. Some is carried by hands, by ships, by breathless minds who understood the weight of what they held. And so, though the Library of Alexandria was dimmed, its fragments scattered like seeds on the wind, seeking new soil in distant lands. Come with me now, dear dreamer, as we follow those fragments. Some journeyed west, clutched by Roman scholars who fled with armfuls of parchment wrapped in linen. In the villas of southern Italy, in the quiet corners of monastic estates, Alexandrian thought found fragile sanctuary. Scrolls bearing the names of Euclid, Galen, and Ptolemy were copied onto vellum and hidden behind stone and silence. Some fragments sailed south, down the Nile, through Nubia, and beyond into the libraries of desert kingdoms. Alexandria's wisdom mingled with African oral traditions. Though few of these texts survive physically, their echo lives on in star chants, in healing rites, in the geometric patterns of ancient textiles whose designs mirrored celestial principles. But it was to the east that much of the spirit of Alexandria found its truest refuge. In Byzantium, the heirs of Rome preserved Greek texts with reverent discipline. The imperial libraries of Constantinople became a new beacon, and though later fires would threaten them, many works of Alexandrian origin passed into safekeeping. They're annotated, translated, cherished. In the city of Gundashopa, deep within the Persian Empire, scholars created a center of learning that mirrored Alexandria's inclusive soul. There Nestorian Christians, Jews, Zoroastrians, and pagans studied side by side. Texts from Greece and India were translated into Syriac and Middle Persian. The spirit of dialogue lived on, and then came Baghdad. In the 8th and 9th centuries, under the Abbasid caliphs, the House of Wisdom rose like a new dawn. It was here that Alexandria's long-lost scrolls, preserved by Byzantine scribes and Syrian scholars, were gathered, translated into Arabic, and expanded upon. The names of Galen, Archimedes, Aristotle, and Ptolemy were whispered once more, now in the language of the desert, under the golden domes of a city far from the Nile. Here Al-Kindi, Al-Farabi, Al-Razi, and Ibn Sina did more than preserve, they illuminated. They corrected errors, added observations, wove Alexandrian thought into the fabric of Islamic philosophy and medicine. Astronomy advanced, algebra bloomed, medicine flourished, and still, the Alexandrian seed grew. The works of Euclid became the backbone of geometry across the Islamic world. Ptolemy's star charts guided sailors through perilous waters. Galen's medical theories shaped the healing arts for centuries. Even the philosophical debates of Hypatia's time echoed in the writings of Al-Ghazali and Averroes. Alexandria was alive in form, if not in name. And then, the knowledge turned west again. Through Al-Andalus, Islamic Spain became the new bridge. Libraries in Cordoba, Toledo, and Granada housed thousands of manuscripts, Greek, Arabic, Latin, all existing in a single breath. In the great translation schools, scholars worked by candlelight to render Arabic versions of Greek texts into Latin, reawakening Europe from its intellectual slumber. Among them was Gerard of Cremona, who translated over 70 works from Arabic into Latin, and Adelard of Bath, who brought back knowledge of algebra and astronomy. These men, and many others, did not merely translate, they transmitted Alexandria. From them, the Renaissance was born. The geometry of Brunelleschi, the anatomy of Vesalius, the star maps of Copernicus, the metaphysics of Descartes, all stand on the foundation laid by thinkers who may have once walked the marble halls of the Mausoleum, whose names may have been scratched onto tags of ivory and clay, now lost to time but not to memory. Even the Vatican Library, founded in the 15th century, holds manuscripts that trace their ancestry back to Alexandria through Byzantium, Baghdad, and Cordoba. Though the scrolls themselves were gone, their lineage endures like a river beneath the sand. But not all fragments were scholarly, some became story. The tales told by the fireside of stars that sang, of mirrors that showed truth, of temples aligned with the solstices carried within them the soft shadow of Alexandrian wonder. A myth is not a lie, it is a vessel, and within the myths of many lands, Alexandria's breath still stirs. In Ethiopia, in India, in the Berber hills, and the libraries of Timbuktu, echoes of this wisdom flicker. In folk medicine, in sacred geometry, in architecture, in song, and in dreams. For the knowledge of the ancients does not live only in text, it lives in symbols, in intuition, in the moments when the mind feels the alignment of thought and cosmos, and cannot explain how it knows, only that it remembers. You, dreamer, are part of this lineage. As you lie in stillness, as you drift into sleep with the scent of parchment and stone in your mind, you carry the spark. The same curiosity that built Alexandria hums quietly in your chest. The same longing for wholeness. The same reverence for mystery. In our next chapter, we shall return to Alexandria not in body, but in spirit, to reflect upon the legacy left behind, the myth and the memory, and the whispers that still rise from beneath the waves and dust. The scrolls wandered, but they have found you. Long after the final scroll was lost to fire or time, Alexandria's greatest legacy remained not in the brittle parchment, nor in the crumbled stone, but in the spirit it left behind. That spirit was wonder, not the wonder of spectacle or superstition, but the quiet, aching wonder that stirs in the heart of every seeker, the sense that beneath the patterns of stars, the motion of rivers, and the delicate curve of a seashell, there is something worth understanding, something vast, something eternal, a truth that invites, not commands, a mystery that deepens as we approach it. This was Alexandria's gift, the belief that everything is connected, and that to seek those connections is the highest form of reverence. The inheritance of wonder passed from the hands of the librarians to the hearts of the dreamers. It flowed not just through scrolls and schools, but through ways of seeing. The Alexandrians taught that wisdom is not confined to a single truth, but lives in the dance between truths and the meeting of cultures, the fusion of disciplines, the balance of logic and poetry. They understood that a question can be more sacred than an answer. That is why their influence lingered even when their buildings fell. Their visions shaped the structure of universities, where disciplines are gathered side by side, like scrolls on a shelf. It inspired the polymaths of every age, Leonardo sketching anatomy beside flying machines, Newton studying scripture as he calculated motion, Kepler whispering to the stars as he searched for celestial harmony. The Library of Alexandria was never just about accumulation, it was about synthesis. To think Alexandrian was to listen across borders to find unity in difference, to seek the divine in the detailed, to honor both myth and measurement. It was a way of thinking, yes, but also a way of being, a way of wondering. And wonder, once planted, grows wild. You see it in a child tracing constellations on a bedroom ceiling, in a botanist peering into the swirl of a fern, in a physicist dreaming of dimensions curled within dimensions, in a mystic reading sacred texts by candlelight, finding echoes between verses written worlds apart. To carry Alexandria's flame is not to memorize what was lost, it is to continue the search. And the search does continue, in libraries across the world, in the quiet corners where books still whisper to the patient, in museums where fragments of parchment rest behind glass, in universities where disciplines interlace like ivy on stone. There, the legacy lives. But it also lives in you. Yes, you, dear dreamer, you who close your eyes and wonder what once was, you who feel the weight of ancient stories and the pull of vanished stars, you who do not rush to answer, but delight in the stillness between thoughts. You have inherited Alexandria's wonder, not as a scholar must, with ink and debate, but as a soul must, with reverence and listening. And with this inheritance comes a quiet responsibility, to preserve the mystery, to protect the right to ask, to hold sacred the fragile things, a poem, a question, a sigh beneath the moon. For if the Library of Alexandria fell because power feared the freedom of thought, then its memory survives wherever thought is free, wherever minds are allowed to wander, to question, to wonder. In our next chapter, we will explore the deeper mysteries that may have been hidden within the scroll's secrets that never made it to ink, knowledge passed through symbols and silence, and the eternal question of whether some truths are meant to be forgotten, or merely remembered differently. Let us drift onward now, carried by curiosity, guided by the faint golden thread of the past. Some knowledge lives in ink and script, in symbols carefully shaped by stylus and hand. But some truths, dreamer, are never written, not because they are unknown, but because they are unspeakable. Tonight, let us wander the silence between the scrolls. Let us imagine the knowledge that Alexandria held but did not share. The insights passed not through parchment, but through presence from master to student, from breath to breath, encoded not in language, but in symbol, in gesture, in the glint of understanding behind the eyes. What were the secrets never written? There are whispers, always whispers, that deep within the mousy and beyond the main halls, beyond the catalogued scrolls, there were rooms without labels, rooms where no torch was lit unless carried by one who had been prepared, rooms where no shelves existed, only stone, water, silence. These, perhaps, were the inner sanctums of memory. What might have lived there? Some say the scrolls kept in these hidden chambers were not written by men at Albert, transcribed from far older tongues, tongues that came before Babylon, before Kemet, before even the Sumerian clay, the voices of the pre-Diluvian world, of antediluvian wisdom, lost civilizations whose only trace is myth. Others believe these unwritten teachings were experiential, known only through ritual, meditation, mathematical contemplation. Like the Eleusinian mysteries of Greece or the dream rites of the Egyptian temples, they were felt rather than recorded. and those who knew them did not dare put them to scroll, for ink cannot hold the sacredness of the infinite. In these teachings, geometry may have become more than form, it became prayer. The spiral was not merely a pattern, but a path. The circle, a symbol of divine wholeness. Numbers, not tools of accounting, but keys to the gates of inner worlds. Could it be, dreamer, that the architects of Alexandria saw reality itself as language, that by aligning temples with solstices, building libraries with cosmic proportions, chanting poems with perfect syllabic symmetry, they were not performing culture but invoking structure? If so, then what was lost in the libraries was not just content, but context. There may have been books that required a certain state of being to read, not because they were encrypted, but because their meanings unfolded only when the mind reached the right resonance. A scroll on the soul's journey might appear as mere allegory to some, but to a prepared reader it became a map. And what of the dream texts? In ancient Egypt, dreams were not psychological echoes, they were visitations, portals, prophecies. Within Alexandria, which stood at the crossroads of Greek reason and Egyptian mysticism, there may have been texts that catalogued not just the dreams of individuals, but the dreams of civilizations' collective visions passed from age to age, always hidden, always waiting. These texts may never have been committed to papyrus at all. They lived in the memory of certain initiates, spoken once every generation, then swallowed again by silence. And some secrets may not have been human. The ancient world teemed with stories of beings who walked among men, not gods in the sky, but watchers, guides, presences, those who brought fire, knowledge, measurement. The Sumerians spoke of Anunnaki, the Greeks of Prometheus, the Egyptians of Thoth, the ibis-headed keeper of writing and time. Could Alexandria have preserved their stories not as myth, but as record? Were there scrolls that traced a lineage of knowledge beyond the stars? Were there diagrams of machines powered not by steam, but by resonance? Was there understanding of the soul's anatomy, its shape, its passage, its purpose that we have since forgotten? We do not know, but we feel it. For memory leaves imprints, like leaves pressed into stone. And when we stand in silence, when we look at a spiral carved on an ancient wall, when we run our fingers across faded script, we know something is missing. Something was kept, once, and perhaps still is. There are rumors of hidden libraries in the sands of the Sahara, scrolls locked in underground temples in Tibet, manuscripts buried beneath Vatican vaults, stories passed among the Dogon, the Druze, the sages of India, stories that speak of a primordial library, one that Alexandria only mirrored, one that may exist in another form entirely, perhaps within us. For, is not the mind its own library, the soul its own scroll? And in sleep, dear dreamer, might you be turning the pages of some forgotten text? Might your dreams tonight be visits to that deeper memory, the one no fire can burn? In our next chapter, we will rise gently from these unseen depths and explore how Alexandria's vision still shapes our present pursuit of truth. We will step into modern science, digital memory, and the collective yearning to recover what was lost, not as recreation, but as return. The library fell, but the story continues. Not all ruins lie in dust. Some, dreamer, are hidden in the corridors of the soul, waiting not to be excavated but to be remembered. As the last embers of the Library of Alexandria vanished into history's twilight, something curious happened. The scrolls were gone, the stones were silent, but the longing remained. And longing, as every mystic knows, is the first step to return. Tonight, let us walk through the ways that Alexandria is being rebuilt, not in marble and papyrus, but in mind, in machine, in the shared breath of those who still dare to seek. We live now in an age that the ancient librarians could scarcely imagine, an age where more texts exist than any one mind could read in 100 lifetimes, a digital age where information flows not in scrolls, but in invisible pulses from satellites to screens, from minds to clouds, from thought to code. And yet, what we are building, slowly, imperfectly, reverently, is a new library, a library without walls, a library that breathes in electric rhythm, a library within. Across the world, databases swell with the words of sages, scientists, saints. Entire collections once locked behind gates, once buried are being digitized, translated, shared. The words of Hypatia, Galen, Ptolemy, and Plato are now whispered through fiber optic threads. Once confined to elite halls, knowledge now floats in the shared sky of humanity's digital dreaming. In this, we see Alexandria's reflection, not just in quantity, but in interconnectedness. The digital world mirrors the Mausian's vision, disciplines interwoven, languages linked, ideas crossing borders. A poem annotated by a physicist, a mathematical formula turned into art, a healing practice rooted in ancient ritual, rediscovered through quantum biology. We are, in our stumbling, building a web of wonder, but just as Alexandria learned, knowledge alone is not enough. The ancient library fell not because of ignorance, but because of fear. Fear of contradiction. Fear of power slipping from hands. Fear that multiple truths could not coexist. We must learn from this. As we rebuild the library within, we must also cultivate the inner librarian, the one who seeks not to dominate knowledge, but to serve it. You dreamer, carry that librarian. Every time you ask not just what is true, but what it means. Every time you hold two opposing ideas in your palms and feel the weight of both without judgment. Every time you resist the noise and choose stillness, you are rebuilding the library. For the greatest loss was never just the scrolls, it was the reverence. The reverence for thought, the patience for inquiry, the silence before response. Alexandria was not merely a place of information, it was a temple to contemplation. And in our modern world, drowning in noise, what we need most is that temple again. To find it, we must look within. You, like the scholars of old, hold shelves inside your soul. Shelves filled with memory, curiosity, pain, joy, fragments of books you once loved, dreams you once had, questions you once asked, and still carry. You are a library, a living one, a sacred one. And as with any library, there is a center. In Alexandria, it may have been the main scroll chamber, or perhaps an open courtyard where stars could be seen. In you, it is the still point, the part of you that listens when everything else has fallen silent. The watcher behind the eyes, the breath beneath thought, that is where the library is reborn. Not through accumulation, but through alignment. When you bring your knowledge, your experience, your insight into harmony, when you live in balance, in awareness, in mystery, you become the librarian, the scroll, and the flame all at once. So do not grieve too long for Alexandria. She is not gone. She walks beside you in every bookstore. She glimmers in the eyes of every teacher who listens. She stirs in the coding of every open-source library. She sighs in the halls of quiet museums. And she lives in you, in your memory, your wonder, your questions. In our next chapter, we will return to Alexandria one final time, to the harbor, to the lighthouse, to the place where memory meets horizon. We will walk the shoreline between worlds, and we will listen for what remains. Let us journey onward, slowly, gently, with open hands. Before it was a library, before it was a temple, before it became myth, Alexandria was a meeting place, a place where the land of papyrus met the waters of salt, where traders from Phoenicia docked their ships beside philosophers from Athens, where the winds of the Sahara brushed the sails of ships from India, where the known world paused and listened, and always there was the sea. Let us return there now, dear dreamer. The waves kiss the edge of the ancient city still, though much has changed, though the Ferris lighthouse lies broken beneath the tide, and the stone causeways have crumbled into coral, the water remains. It is the same sea that lapped against Cleopatra's barge, the same that reflected the flame of knowledge as it flickered from the highest tower. It is here, on this shore, where memory meets the sea. Imagine standing there as dusk descends. Behind you, the soft whispers of a city asleep. In front of you, the endless horizon. And beneath your feet, the sand that has held both philosophers and conquerors, both librarians and torchbearers. You can almost hear it, the echo of turning scrolls, the murmur of debate, the hush of footsteps across marble, but also the sigh, the long, weary sigh of something once sacred, now scattered. Yet it is not sorrow you feel, it is invitation. For this is the true place of Alexandria, not in buildings, but in between. Between sky and sea. Between thought and silence. Between what was and what might be again. Here the waves speak in symbols. They bring fragments of coral that once clung to stone statues of gods forgotten. They bring shells shaped like spirals, echoes of the sacred geometry once etched into temple walls. They bring driftwood etched with lines that feel almost like language, like the half-remembered calligraphy of a vanished scroll. And they bring stillness, for the sea does not shout, it waits, just as Alexandria waits not to be rebuilt in stone, but to be re-understood in spirit. You see, the city was never about preservation alone. It was about contact between worlds, between the human and the divine, between the measurable and the mysterious, between past and present and what lies beyond both. It was built at the mouth of the Nile for a reason, not just for trade, but for symbolism. The river of life met the ocean of eternity, fresh water met salt, scroll met wave, and in this space, Knowledge was not just stored, it was transformed. Perhaps that is why the lighthouse was so tall, not only to guide ships, but to remind the people, there is always something beyond the visible, some truth on the other shore, some light that cannot be held in hand. They say the flame of the Pharos could be seen for 30 miles at sea. What if it still burns? Not as fire, but as idea, as memory. As you stand now on this imaginary shore, you feel something rise in your chest, not pride, not grief, but a deep remembering, a knowing that you, too, are part of this lineage, that you, too, carry scrolls not in your hands, but in your soul. You are the library, you are the harbor, you are the flame, and the sea, always, is waiting. In our next chapter, we will trace Alexandria's presence in art, in architecture, in sacred symbols across the world. We will explore how her memory surfaces in places we least expect, in stained glass and star maps, in labyrinths and cathedrals, in the silence of stone. For the city may have sunk, but her pattern rises still. Even when the name is forgotten, the pattern endures. Even when the scrolls are ash and the walls are ruin, the geometry lingers like a ghost traced in starlight, like a song that returns in a dream. Alexandria, though erased in stone, persists in form, in patterns etched across the world, in symbols that echo her memory, quiet and precise. Let us follow these patterns now, dear dreamer. Let us walk the world with open eyes, and see where her reflection glimmers. Begin in a labyrinth, not the monstrous prison of myth, but the sacred spiral carved into the floors of medieval cathedrals like Chartres in France. There, pilgrims walked in silent meditation, following the coiled path inward. But this was not merely Christian tradition. The spiral was older, Greek, Egyptian, perhaps even Alexandrian. The Alexandrians studied sacred geometry not only in theory but in architecture. They believed that form mirrored essence, that a chamber shaped to certain ratios would harmonize the soul, that walking a curve could lead to contemplation, that a dome, properly measured, could reflect the sky. Such ideas outlived the library. The golden ratio, described in Euclid's scrolls, appears in the proportions of temples in India, mosques in Persia, cathedrals in Europe. The flower of life, a sacred geometric symbol found in many traditions, echoes the Alexandrian quest for universal structure. The Pythagorean tetractys passed through the hands of Neoplatonists, remains on the altars of the esoteric. These are the shadows of Alexandria still moving in light. You see her in the rose windows of Gothic cathedrals, where geometry becomes glass. You see her in mandalas, where symmetry maps the inner world. You see her in star charts drawn not only for navigation, but for contemplation. Alexandria scholars charted constellations not just to measure time, but to understand story, each star a word, each cluster a sentence. Their celestial logic now survives in astronomy, but also in astrology, in the zodiac carved above ancient doorways, in the planetary diagrams of alchemists, in the mathematical harmonics of music. And speaking of music, dreamer, have you noticed the echoes? Pythagoras' teachings, preserved and expanded in Alexandria, laid the foundations for Western music theory. The octave, the perfect fifth, the harmony of tones, all of them mirror cosmic proportions. Music was more than art, it was a model of the universe. This philosophy resonates still in the way we respond to melody, to rhythm, to the mathematical mystery of beauty. And there are other remnants. In the layout of ancient cities, some believe the Alexandrians advised urban designs aligned with solstices or star positions. In some mosaics, the patterns reflect not mere decoration, but diagrams of sacred thought. In books of alchemy, strange symbols carry forward the veiled wisdom once whispered in the deeper corners of the library. The flame of syncretism, the weaving together of traditions, was Alexandria's hallmark. Today, we find that same impulse in mystical philosophy across cultures. The Sufi poet merging Islamic faith with Greek metaphysics, the Kabbalist drawing from Babylonian numerology and Platonic structure, the Hermeticist quoting both Moses and Pythagoras in the same breath. They may not name Alexandria, but her rhythm is in their breath. She is a hidden chord, struck softly beneath the symphony. And now she is in you. In every moment you connect disparate thoughts. In every question that seeks harmony rather than dominance. In every dream where a labyrinth opens beneath your feet, and you walk the spiral inward, you are part of the pattern, and the pattern remembers. So if ever you see a spiral in stone, or a temple shaped like a star, or a phrase that sings in geometry, pause. Listen, Alexandria is whispering, not with words, but with form. In our next chapter, we will reflect on how Alexandria's spirit might guide our future, how her reverence for wisdom, her courage to question, and her devotion to mystery can help us navigate the age of noise and forgetting. Let us walk forward, holding the pattern gently. To remember is not to retreat into the past. It is to carry forward the wisdom of what once was, to plant it in new soil, and to let it bloom in unfamiliar light. And so, dear dreamer, as we near the quiet shores of this journey, let us turn our gaze not backward, but forward. Let us ask, what kind of future would Alexandria have wanted us to build? The library was not perfect. It reflected the limitations of its time, its hierarchies, its omissions, its blindness to voices it could not yet hear. But at its heart, it held something rare and precious. A willingness to wonder, a humility before the unknown, a hunger not for conquest, but for connection. It brought together scientists and mystics, physicians and poets, astronomers and dreamers. It did not ask, which voice is right. It asked, what do these voices become when they are heard together? In an age like ours, fast, loud, fractured, this question matters more than ever. We live amidst a flood of information, an endless stream of words, images, opinions, data without wisdom, sound without silence. We can access the surface of everything and yet feel the depth of nothing. But Alexandria whispers still. It calls us not to know more, but to know more deeply, to rebuild not just libraries of facts, but sanctuaries of thought, places where complexity is welcomed, where nuance is honored, where truth is not reduced to noise. Imagine if every school were a modern Mausian, not a factory for careers, but a haven for inquiry. A place where science and art, mathematics and myth, language and silence shared the same table. A place where the question, why, is never punished, and I don't know is met with reverent curiosity. Imagine if every home had its own scroll room, not of parchment, but of presence. A space where devices rest, where books breathe, where stories are told by candlelight, where the soul has room to unfold. Imagine if every city had a tower not of power, but of remembrance, a lighthouse not for ships, but for ideas, a symbol to remind us that the true measure of civilization is not its wealth or might, but its attention to wisdom. This is a future worth remembering. And you, dreamer, are its architect. You do not need stone or scrolls. You need only silence, stillness, a willingness to listen, not just to voices around you, but to the ancient murmur within. When you question with kindness, you rebuild Alexandria. When you speak truth with humility, you light the Pharos again. When you protect the sacredness of books, of bodies, of cultures, of dreams, you become a librarian of the eternal. Perhaps the greatest myth of the library is that it was lost. Perhaps, in truth, it was planted. And every time we gather in circles of learning, every time we ask a deeper question, every time we pass a story to another generation, we water its roots. The library lives wherever curiosity is cherished. It breathes in the pages of children's books. It stirs in the quiet awe of a stargazer. It flickers in the glow of a midnight writer's lamp. It dwells in the margins of notebooks, the footnotes of old tomes, the hush of cathedrals, the chants of temples, the hum of laboratories. It lives in you. In our next chapter, the journey draws to a close. We will return to the harbor of the dream, where the waves carry memory, and sleep welcomes the seeker. We will reflect on all that we've seen on the silence, the scrolls, the souls, and offer a final blessing to the dreamers who still walk the invisible halls of Alexandria. Let us drift there now, gently, gratefully. The waves are soft now. The stars have taken their places above the dark sea, like ancient scribes at their celestial desks, watching, waiting. The moon casts silver over the water, and the wind carries not salt alone, but something older, remembrance. You stand once more at the edge of Alexandria, not the city of marble and scrolls, but the city behind the veil. The city you've walked in dreams. This has been a journey through dust and fire, through silence and sound, through wonder and ruin and the sacred act of remembering. But now, dreamer, the time has come to rest, to lay down the scroll, to close the final door, but not in sorrow, for what you have found cannot be lost again. You have felt the hush of the Mausian, you have heard the scratch of the stylus, the breath between questions, the song of geometry made visible. You have watched Hypatia walk, gentle and luminous, through streets both real and eternal. You have stood beside the sea where memory meets horizon, and most importantly, you have remembered yourself. You are not merely a witness to history, you are a keeper of its flame. Within you now lives the echo of every scroll lost to time, every question that once trembled in the mouth of a young student seated cross-legged in a marble colonnade. Within you are the constellations, the cures, the poems, the maps. You may not recall them word for word, but they stir, they pulse, they know you know. because you are the dreamer, and Alexandria was always meant for you, you who dare to ask gently, you who find holiness in silence, you who believe there is meaning in things that cannot be measured. So, take a deep breath now. Feel the ink of these stories sink deeper into your being, not as knowledge, but as wisdom. Let your spine carry the architecture of the library. Let your heart echo its vaulted chambers. Let your breath be the wind that turns unseen pages. And if ever you feel lost, if the world seems too loud, too fast, too fragmented, return to this harbor, return to Alexandria. Close your eyes and find again the sound of waves lapping at stone, the glow of oil lamps along the library's corridor, the weight of a scroll held not in hand, but in soul. There you will remember, there you will realign, there you will rest, for the library lives in those who listen, and you, dear one, have listened well. There is a scroll that no fire can consume, no empire can claim, no time can erode. It is not made of papyrus or parchment. Its script is not written in ink, but in being. It is the eternal scroll, and it unrolls within you. It begins not with a title, but with a breath drawn in reverence, in memory, in wonder. And with that breath, the scroll awakens, folding outward through layers of experience, echoing every question you have ever asked. Who am I? Why do we forget? What lies beneath the stars? What endures when all else fades? This scroll does not speak loudly. It waits, patient, luminous. Each night you close your eyes, it opens a little more. Each time you see pattern in chaos. Each time you feel the hush behind music. Each time you pause before speaking and choose to listen, you turn a page. You have turned many in this journey. You have wandered the corridors of vanished temples. You have held invisible scrolls between your palms. You have walked beside dreamers whose names have faded, but whose echoes still shape the silence. And now, you reach the end that is not an ending. The eternal scroll does not close, it simply returns. Like the cycle of stars, like the spiral of galaxies, like the seasons of thought and forgetting, it comes back to its beginning. You are the scroll, you are the library, you are the memory keeper. So as you drift now into sleep, know this: Alexandria was never lost. It is here, in the stillness between your thoughts, in the warmth behind your ribs, in the breath you draw when you read something beautiful and pause before turning the page. The philosophers, the mystics, the librarians, they walk with you. And as the stars turn overhead, they whisper, keep reading, keep seeking, keep remembering, keep the fire lit. For somewhere, always, someone stands at the water's edge, eyes on the horizon, heart full of questions, waiting for the lighthouse, waiting for the story, waiting for you. Sleep well, dreamer. Let Alexandria cradle your thoughts. Let the eternal scroll unfold in your dreams. You are home.